Welcome to the 10,000 Things Zoom for November 17th, 2018. I'm Robert Saltzman, author of the 10,000 Things. I published that book in February of 2017, and since then it has been spreading around the world, actually, and seems to capture the imagination of people with an interest in these matters. If you haven't looked into it, I will put some links to free chapters in the description. Just click on them and read away. My guest today is Bernard Guy. Bernard and I had a Zoom meeting last month that left me feeling very happy and filled with all kinds of feelings and thoughts that are quite welcome in a mind like mine. Bernard and I intend to speak one-to-one for a period of time. Then we'll take a 5-minute break and throw the meeting open to anyone who wants to participate. So during the dialogue time between me and Bernard, please keep your microphone turned off because any extraneous sounds play havoc with the recording. I asked Bernard to choose the topic for the meeting, and he has. And it seems to be a fruitful one that really could be the subject of many meetings, but we've got this one. So let me turn it over to Bernard and ask him to elucidate. Bernard, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Robert, and welcome everybody. Well, big topic. I was just prior to the beginning of this, I was talking with Robert a little, and something came up this morning as I was reading a response I gave to someone that is here in the meeting, actually, Chris Scheid, some years ago, in a group where we were active, both Robert and I and a number of other people, including Chris. At some point, Chris brought up the question, in his own words, was, what are some of the useful things one can do? Yeah, obviously that question is bound to come up. In the last meeting, Racim asked it. There was a participant named Racim, and you know, he said a few things, and then at the end he said, yeah, well, so how? It's one of the famous questions that is bound to come at some point to people, you know. It's like we see those guys, you know, people like Robert or whoever, you know, the Buddha, and they seem to be in a groovy enough space, you know. So at some point it's like, yeah, but how, you know, how do I get there? How, you know, how does it happen? So, so the question Chris was asking, what are some of the useful things one can do? And I wrote to him at that time, so Chris, this question and the subject matter related to it are to me of such vital significance that responding to it in a few words or a single post seems, well, preposterous, talking of posts. Plus, I hardly know where you're at with all this, whether you've already done things around that or not, and so on. Yet here we are. I wrote what I wrote, you asked a question, so let's have a go at it. Starting with a few general considerations to create a context that's actually inseparable from what we're looking at. That could take a little while, so bear with me. So people, that could take a little while, it won't be too long, but bear with me. To begin with, whatever I may say is what works for me, Me is in capital letter. And this is very important. To begin with, and I would like to add that whatever I'm going to say in this meeting, and as far as I'm concerned, whatever Robert is going to say, or whatever, whoever, from whenever the past, present, or future is going to say about it, this applies. To begin with, whatever I may say is what worked or works for me. It's obvious to me that this is one of those highly personal matters. One man's medicine is another poison, they say. Fair enough. Another relevant saying is one attributed to Buddha that goes something like, truth is that which works. I like that. It's practical, down to earth. Works for me. Truth is that which works. So that's a crucial point. We all need to find what works for us, what rings right for our own heart, our own mind. It's our own life after all, no one else's. And if we don't take that to heart, no one will for us. Then there's the issue that there are so many paths, so many approaches to reality that human beings came up with, each with their own take on it and the methodology and practice that follow. Unless we happen upon one of them that rings a bell for us from the start and remains with us from then on, that's something that can be quite puzzling, if not confusing, especially nowadays. I'd like to add, in this day and age where everything is so much easily available because of the internet and all this, it's even more puzzling and can be confusing. And actually, I've came across a lot of people that are quite confused because they sample a little of this path and they sample a little of that path and they listen to this teacher and that teacher and that teacher. And they don't say the same thing. This is one of the, for me, immature thing that one may think that, oh, well, they're all talking about the same thing. Well, sorry, sure, you could say, they're all talking about spirituality, but they're not talking about the same realization. The realization of a Buddhist of emptiness is very different from the realization of love, let's say, of a Sufi, or of, whatever. There are many aspects to reality, and each teacher and each teaching tend to have its own, its own central aspect or a couple aspects that are central to the teaching. So I keep going. So I just said that there's the issue that there are so many paths and approaches. As I see it, every teaching presents a unique understanding, perspective, or view of reality based on particular realizations of it. Parts of the view overlap, others don't. Some even clash. Then, on the basis of those realizations, a methodology arises, a particular practice, a set of skillful means as it goes, which, if applied faithfully, is said to lead to those realizations, which it does generally, not in the sense of necessarily, but in the sense that this is where they take you. Now that raises a few essential questions. We can talk of some useful things one can do, but about what exactly? What's the usefulness for? What is it all about? If each view holds a piece of reality, as it were, what about the whole thing? Once we realize to a degree or another what reality is, that reality is the whole thing, would we draw a line anywhere and say, this is it? Can we? Personally, I could never do it, though I would try. So Chris asked, what are some of the useful things one can do? So what to do? In my experience, it's useful to do some groundwork on those levels. So now I wrote there something that I would have spontaneously said in the conversation here about useful things one can do. We thought that it would be about spiritual practice work. One first thing I can say is, for me, since quite a while by now, I cannot separate psychological work from spiritual work. I cannot separate the two, because more and more my experience shows that they are not separate. Let's take a simple example. Let's say I'm dealing on a psychological level with issues around the presence and absence of love. Yeah, that's a famous one. A lot of human beings seems to be the planet of the loving beings, planet Earth, love, love, love. And it's understandable enough, given what love is and lovable qualities and all that. So somebody is dealing with the presence of absence of love in his life. Well, in my own experience and understanding, and seeing it in others too, some people separate the two fields. You can work on the ego self on a psychological level around the presence and absence of love. So you go into your past, and then you start to, unearth all kinds of things that happened around that. Your mother was so absent, so you didn't get the love you need and all that. And the more you see through those things, it creates a space to start to see that those things happen, and that created all the pain around the absence of love. And then you might cry, and you can work just on the psychological side of things. In the same way, you can work just on the spiritual side of things. And actually, you have some teachers and teachings that say that they're not even interested in working on the psychological side, because they say, for example, that love is an aspect of being. So just realize your being as love, and that will settle things. But in my own experience and understanding, they're not two separate things, because there's a possibility of working with the psychological material to a point where you go deeper and deeper, and you see through self-images related to your past experience, and they get more and more transparent, and slowly a space opens up where finally love can manifest. So we might go more into that, but that's something very basic for me since a good number of years by now, that I don't see those two fields as separate. I don't see anything as separate anymore, to tell the truth. So I cannot see the psychological field and the spiritual field as separate. We might go more into that. So I'll keep on, that will answer something about, the side of the psychological side of it. So what to do? Then I write, in my experience, it's useful to do some groundwork on those levels. So my own experience, which I did myself, and looking at most people around me, I feel that it's really useful to do some groundwork. And by that, I mean that, of course, we might be moved to do psychological work of any kind because we're really suffering, and that moves us, to do this kind of work. That's beautiful, fine, and it's appropriate. But I'm talking now as something more basic than that. I'm talking about what I find to be something that could be useful to everybody. Now, I'd like to point out that we're talking generally here. And the beauty of generally is that it speaks to everyone. The downside of generally is that it doesn't speak to each person individually. So we're talking generally here. So back to what I was reading. In my experience, it's useful to do some groundwork on those levels. How much? That varies for each person, and it's for each to feel that out. This is about opening, loosening things up, easing them off, and bringing about more of their natural movement. So what we're talking about here is about doing some groundwork into loosening the heart, loosening the vitality, loosening the body, loosening the mind, loosening everything. I mean, I did some years of psychotherapeutic work myself. And I remember that in this post, I'm going to talk about that I personally favor psychotherapeutic approaches that are centered more based on the body. I favor those approaches because rather than just being talk approach where you just talk, they actually involve the whole body. So you're more working on the level also of muscles and the nervous system. And by activating the vitality and the energy, you're working with emotions. And then, of course, as you exchange with the therapist, you're working on the mind level also. So that's the first thing one of the first thing I answered Chris about is I'm all in favor, in a general sense, for people to do some groundwork at the level of the vitality, at the level of the energy, at the level of the body, at the level of the emotions. I mean, I did some for a few years and I really needed it, like just on the level of emotions. Myself, and I see so many people, they cannot even cry, when they feel like crying. They cannot be angry when they're actually feeling angry. They cannot shake in fear when they're actually afraid. I mean, the natural response of the body when you're afraid is you shake. You look at any animal, when he's afraid, he's shaking. There's actually some beautiful trauma work happening in the last couple of years. And some of the technique like Peter Levin work is very beautiful. They're actually rather simple technique. They work with the breath and certain posture of the body, and they lead you quite fast to a place where suddenly your whole body starts to shake because it starts to release all the accumulated trauma and all the fear that was there that was not allowed to move. When the fear is allowed to move, it shakes. When anger is allowed to move, you become red hot. The breathing starts to go faster and you start to feel all this energy coming up. When sadness or grief or pain, in the sense of sadness comes up, well, you just start to cry and then you feel, this gentleness and vulnerability come to your heart. And if you open more to the heart aspect, compassion starts to become more compassionate, more vulnerable. So that's why one of the first thing I answered to Chris was, and we're not even talking yet about spiritual practice, which was the main theme that, we said this meeting would be about. But I really feel that there's some groundwork that could be useful for most people, especially Westerners. I think each culture can be a little different, and again, it's very individual. It's very individual. Like if I look at my story, I come from a big family. I was one of the last ones. Somehow, my mother was so busy that to a level, it's like I had no mother because there were 7 children in the family and I'm the last one. So imagine you come in a family and the house is full of people. You come in and there's no room for you really, and mom is so busy that it's like, and I became quite close to her in her last years, and it was so touching. At some point she said she was realizing that she could have been more of a friend to her children. And like she was 84 and it's just beautiful the things she realized in the last couple of years of her life. And one of those things was that suddenly she was looking back at her life and seeing, wow, I could have been more intimate with my children. But she was so busy that, so in a way I didn't. And my father, he was that old generation, serious man, lost in his work. So it's like I never had a father. So, that's my reality of my upbringing. Somebody else had loving parents who were quite, wonderful, and they were really there for them. And so they didn't get that damaged, emotionally. And if you get damaged emotionally, then you repress it. If you repress it, your whole consciousness goes down, your whole energy goes down. I just said something very important, that each time we repress anything in ourselves, we're not just repressing an energy or an emotion, we're narrowing down our awareness, our consciousness. And that could be, in a sense, one of the worst outcomes of repression. you're not just repressing an emotion or an energy. You're actually narrowing down your awareness and your consciousness. So what happens to somebody who lived in a situation, in an environment where he had to repress himself a lot? Well, he ends up with a very little consciousness, very little awareness, not just very little emotions, capacity to be alive feeling-wise, not just a little energy, but consciousness-wise, awareness-wise. And then he becomes an adult, and then he meets spiritual teachers, and then they tell him, wake up, and they tell him, you are that, and all that. But there's this tiny bit of awareness that is receiving this message. And what can it do? It's like most of it's not just the energy or the heart or the emotion that is kind of fast asleep. The awareness itself by now has narrowed down, it became unconscious. And we say that in psychology. I don't live something, so I repress it, so it became part of the unconscious. So same thing happens with the presence, with the awareness, with the consciousness. It's narrowed and narrowed and narrowed and narrowed. And you end up with functioning with just this little bit of consciousness, little bit of awareness. So maybe one last thing I'll say about that is, which something I addressed at the end of that post to Chris, was then I talk about cognitively also, because now I talk more about, vitality and emotions and all that. But then there's also, a big part of also waking up is about cognition. And what is this word? I always have it. For some reason, Robert will help me with that. What's the word? Epistemology? Is that the right word?
Yeah, that's it. Epistemology.
Right. Yeah, which is the science of knowledge and how we get to cognize things, knowing and reification, right?
Yes, it's a study of what can be known and how it can be known.
Right. So that's also a big part. So I was writing there. I also found that understanding some things about the structure of the personality or the ego self, its nature, how it develops, can help a good deal. Studying some of the discovery of psychology, like that of ego developmental psychology and object relations school of thought, was very helpful for me. So that's another thing, I find in my own path that it was very helpful to study some of the finding of psychology and ego developmental psychology and epistemology, how all that goes. So, useful things to do. We can talk about the body, we can talk about vitality or energy, we can talk about the heart and emotion, we can talk about cognition and epistemology. And we're not even yet addressing spiritual practice as such, which is a whole field in itself, which is, supposed to be the main topic. So, and then that thing, when I wrote that post to Chris, it ended up with saying, and then there's the question of quote unquote spiritual practice. Yes, we're getting there. And then in parentheses, I write, while to me, really, all is spiritual or nothing is. I personally, I say I don't see a separation between psychology and spirituality. I don't see a separation between spiritual and material. It's not even relevant for me anymore to say this is spiritual. I mean, it is what it is, this all mind-blowing reality. Call it what you want. And making a division into spiritual and material or psychological and spiritual, it's really a duality that the human mind invent. It can have its usefulness. So now, we brought up the topic here about spiritual practice. We've got to call it something, I guess, but really it's all of one piece to me. So enough as an introduction. I thought it would be shorter than that, Robert, but here we are.
Well, no worries. It's always interesting to hear what you have to say, Bernard. Well, I want to respond by agreeing wholeheartedly with something that you said, which is that whatever one has to say about life pertains to that person and can never be a generality that will fit everyone. Which to me implies that no one can actually help you to awaken. No one can actually help you to awaken. Whatever another human being may experience or believe is not some kind of universal truth. It's a point of view. Naturally, some points of view are very much more useful or valuable than others. I don't mean that listening to the Buddha and listening to Donald Trump will take you to the same place. Clearly not. So we do have to discern and distinguish. However, when we promote anyone, I say, whether it's the Buddha or Robert Saltzman, and thank you for bracketing me with the Buddha, Bernard, that's high praise. I'll get to that in a moment. Whenever we elevate someone, Jesus Christ or the Buddha or Lao Tzu or whoever it may be, into the infallible expert, we become deluded. Right at that point, we are deluded. The words of the Buddha or the words of Robert Saltzman, for that matter, may help you. I think things that I've said have helped others. But eventually, each one of us must find our own way in our own way. This seems clear. Now, I usually avoid speaking autobiographically, but I think after listening to you, Bernard, talking about your experiences with psychotherapy and such, I think I should relax that rule a bit. And I will speak autobiographically. I think it's the best approach. What happened to me is I was a man in my 30s. I had a very profound and sudden awakening experience. It wasn't something that I expected. It wasn't something that I was aiming at. I was practicing spiritually and philosophically in a way, but what I was practicing really had very little to do with the actual experience of awakening. And I think that's important to understand. We all have a kind of carrot in front of us when we're seeking spiritually, and we imagine that if I could get a bite of that carrot, that would just take care of everything. But that's really not what it was like for me. I was sitting in my pickup truck on the edge of the Rio Grande Gorge. I lived in Taos, New Mexico at the time. And this is just a beautiful vista. This is an incredible landscape. And there's nothing there. I was alone. And quite suddenly, I became aware that all of this was just here, including Robert, and that Robert had nothing to do with it. It was just here. I wasn't doing anything. And this is what you call no doer. This is a common trope in spirituality. There's no doer, or no person really exists, or whatever, however that is put. Well, this came as a complete shock to me, and I've written about this elsewhere. It took days and days for me to stop laughing and to calm down and to get back into ordinary consensual reality. I didn't really know how to make sense of that experience. I did a lot of reading to see what others who had similar experiences thought about it and all of that. And gradually, I was able to own some of that. And then I became ill, very ill. This was the first attack of an illness from which I'm suffering now, but I've got it under control with medication. But this was about a year of, a little more than a year of really terrible suffering on the physical level. And during that time, I tried everything I could to deal with this illness. There was no cure for it, no known cure. And I tried everything. One of my Native American friends from the Taos Pueblo gave me some mud from the sacred lake and told me I should eat some of that every day. And I did. I ate mud every day. This is an example of what you call desperation to survive, I guess. Well, another thing I did was consult a naturopath. And this was a young guy, about 10 years younger than I was at the time. And he was taking my history. And I was explaining to him what I was going through. And I looked into his eyes and I saw this amazing compassion, amazing, beautiful compassion just coming out of this guy's face. And at that moment, almost as if someone had spoken this in my ear, what I heard was, "That's what you should be doing, Robert." And I understood that to mean not doing naturopathic healing. I was a photographer at the time. I had no training or understanding of that, really. Not naturopathic healing is what I should be doing, but compassion. It was a real wake up that I had been living selfishly. And even though I felt bright and I was a recognized artist and had a nice life in many ways, it was empty. It was really empty, because when you do not feel others in the depths of your heart, you're only partially alive. Now, at that point, I was faced with a dilemma, because the world of artist, photographer is a highly competitive situation. There's a lot of people who want to be known as a photographer. And it's pretty easy, after all, to get a camera and click the shutter. I mean, there's not that much you have to know. Of course, that's not true, but that's how people approach it. And so I was involved in this world where everyone is saying, "No, me, no, look at my stuff, no, me." And everybody's pushing and trying to get exhibition space and get into the museum show and whatever it is. And I was part of that. And after I saw this truth about compassion, I just couldn't continue with it. It stopped. Not that I didn't want to continue with it, I actually wanted to continue with it, but when I tried, it didn't work. I could not get it up anymore. And at that point, I fell into a kind of despair, or depression, I guess. It's when you see emptiness and you don't know how to fill it. And it occurred to me that I had been reading psychology for 20 years. I was very familiar with the great ones like Freud and Jung and all that. And I was interested in psychotherapy, although I'd never had any. And I decided that I would go back to school and get some degrees and change careers from photographer to psychotherapist. And that's what I did. And so that began a 20-year experience of being a psychotherapist to hundreds of people. I'm retired from that work now, and I guess what we're doing here is the tail end of that. What I became aware of in doing that work is the universality of suffering. There is no one you know who isn't suffering in one way or another. No one. And, you know, Bernard said, well, people regard Robert as, you know, he's in some kind of cool state, like the Buddha. That's true. I consider myself awake. And that's what Buddha means. It means awakened one. And I don't really see any difference between me and the Buddha. And when I say that, many people will say, oh my God, what an ego trip. This is, how can you speak that way? This is this great person and you're, well, he's dead and I'm alive. So I got that going for me, for one thing. but it's not a claim. It's actually a meltdown. It's a recognition of powerlessness, which is what the Buddha said. There's a famous story. The Buddha's sidekick asks him, he says, oh, awakened one, when you experience this unexcelled, perfect enlightenment, what did you experience? And the Buddha said, Subhuti, when I experienced unexcelled, awakened enlightenment, I experienced absolutely nothing. And you see, that is the thing that I think a lot of people, when they regard someone like me, who really is happy, despite the suffering, despite the limitations, despite the death, all of this, but the cat somehow, the balls are in the air, you know, how does that happen? It happens when you realize that you are powerless, that all of this is unfolding, including oneself. It's a realization. Now, I don't know how to make someone realize that. I have no idea. And that's why I say I'm not a spiritual teacher. I'm not a spiritual teacher. If someone comes to me and says, Robert, educate me spiritually, all I can really say is you're not doing this. If you realize that, the work will be done. But there's the problem. How does someone who is seeking to go elsewhere get to the feeling that I'm not doing this? Because after all, you imagine that there is something that you're going to do. What you're going to do is awaken and be like the Buddha or any one of these spiritual teachers that to me is like a blight on the landscape. I don't think they would be speaking in that way, telling you, I have truth. I have it. I have truth. And all you need to do is listen to what I say and you will have truth, as if truth were some technique that you could learn or some fact. And what I have to bring to this party is that it's not a fact. It's not a skill. You can learn a skill gradually. I learned Spanish. It took me 20 years to become competent, day by day. And I worked on it. I had dictionaries and all the rest of it. But you cannot learn this gradually. It's a complete and total abruption. It's a sudden insight. It's a blowing of your mind. It's a stop. It's a death. It's a death. And I think that what gets in the way for so many of us who are really close, we're really close, the thing that, the wall, when we hit the wall, in my view, in my experience, I've counseled hundreds of people. So this is not, I'm not just dreaming this. I've spoken to people about their lives in a deep way. The one thing they do not want is to die. We do not want to die. We want to be here. We do not want this to end. No one wants it to end, except people who are in terrible pain, psychological or physical. They may want it to end. The rest of us, oh no, oh no. So even if I had the truth and could speak it, I don't. But even if I did, I could speak it and everyone would say, oh, well, okay, but I'm not ready for that yet because that's too extreme. I think I'll just kind of enjoy, you know, ordinary life. Well, that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm enjoying ordinary life. I'm not making a big deal out of it because I don't see any big deal to it. It's a biological thing. You're born, you live for a while, and then you die. This is true. This is just true, as far as I know. And the limitation of what I call spiritual teaching as it's conducted by, I won't mention their names anymore, I've gotten into too much trouble, but there's a bunch of these teachers who are very famous. And I've looked into their teaching because people have asked me to. And what I see generally is very bright people who have read a lot, who understand a lot, but they take it too far and they make a claim, and the claim is bogus. And the claim is that they are finished. They've come to it, and now they're going to give it to you. And I think where Bernard and I agree is that no one is ever finished. There's no end to this, no end to it. And that's why I'm not a spiritual teacher. I can't end it for you. I can't end your suffering. I have sat with people, I've had some clients who I worked with for 5 or 6 years. Once a week, twice a week, maybe 3 times a week, these people would come and speak with me because they were suffering. Their suffering didn't end. All I could do was put some perspective on it. And that's all I think that I can do now. The other thing that Bernard said that I'd like to agree with is that there's no universal approach. This is so obvious. That from my point of view, from my perspective, many people are in this bhakti place where they want to find something to adore and something to bow to. Now, that goes against my particular psychological orientation. And I could go into the reasons for it, as Bernard did about his family. I had a father who was just overwhelming. I was the firstborn. I was supposed to carry the flag for the family and all the rest of it. And I had to demur and rebel and do something else with my life. And so I'm certainly not prepared to bow down to anything and to adore anything, except maybe my wife. But you know, I get all kinds of helpful side effects for that adoration. But to actually say Krishnamurti had truth, no, I'm not going to do it. He was very influential in my thinking, but not capital T truth. He had his own hang-ups. And if you know that story, well, they become apparent. Well, I've rattled on and on here. That's the danger in this kind of situation. So I'm going to give it back to Bernard for comment.
Well, one thing you said that is definitely true is talking about spiritual practice is the fact that whatever spiritual practice one has, realization always come. It's always like what's the word you use? You didn't say eruption, you use
abruption. I use the word abruption.
Abruption, yeah. Or eruption would also be related. So that's clear. It happens when you're walking down the road or taking a bath or enjoying a cup of coffee in a cafe or looking out the window. It always happens when you're not looking for it. And that's actually easily understandable. If you are there looking for it, then what you get is yourself looking for it. Obviously, it can only happen in a moment when you're not there looking for it. And this is kind of the tragic comedy of it all, is what most people are looking for, which is basically, you know, peace or happiness and all that. They would find it if they would just stop looking for it. That's the cosmic joke and the tragedy of it all, is if they would just stop, you know, you said at some point, stop, you know. Yeah, if they would just stop and see, but then, yeah. Then we come back, Robert, to the point which we're both aware of is, you know, you're far from being the first one who's saying, you know, that it's just, you know, just stop and see. Let's put it, you know, we have to put it one way, so let's use that way. Just stop. But then the thing is that for most people, it doesn't work. You know, that's the catch, you know.
Yeah, Bernard, I think where you and I would agree is that the ordinariness of just being alive, it's obvious, it's simple, it's not really hard. And this condition that I'm calling awakeness and imputing to myself, it's not extraordinary. It only just seems extraordinary when it's seen from a point of view that imagines that in order to be awake, you need to become something better or more advanced than you are right now.
Yeah.
But something different from what is right now is literally unattainable. All you can be is what you are right now. This is obvious. So all kinds of spiritual fantasies arise, and the fantasies are the complexity. So I feel that my work at this point is to try to take these spiritual fantasies and move them aside. And that's all I can do. I can't teach anybody to be awake, but I can say, as long as you pray to some outside force as if that was really going to awaken you, that can't happen.
I understand, Robert, but there's a catch there too, you know. We know that potentially there's a catch in anything, right?
Yes, that's right.
Because of how human beings are, because of how we are, there's a catch in anything. So you have your own take on it, and you've been repeating that, it's nothing new. It's just the phrasing might be different. You have your own way of stating it, but it is nothing new. But the catch is that, and I've seen it happening, in the first meeting I brought up, that I was with Papaji when he was little known, Punjaji. And, months passed and I would see all those people sitting there day in, day out, week in, week out, month in, month out, and nothing was happening for them. And basically Papaji, with his own brand, that's what he was saying, like, just stop, it's like, you're not getting anywhere with all this. Things are as they are here and now. This is it, stop. But then the thing is that, the ego, like you said, avoiding death, it doesn't want to die, So it's very clever. So he hears that, he says, okay, now I've got it. It grabs that and he says, okay, I'll stop. I'll stop all spirituality. I'll stop reading any book. I'll drop all the spiritual knowledge I had up to now. Anyway, it didn't work. Anyway, it didn't work. I still don't find myself awake, especially, So it will that's the catch. Is the ego will grab that. And then that becomes the new belief. I don't believe in anything. No need for any belief. And so on and so forth. And then nothing has changed. So it's tricky. It's so tricky.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That's a really difficult. That's a conundrum, and I also agree with that telling someone just do this or just do that doesn't work. It doesn't work. I have never seen it work. I've never seen it work. I think what is helpful is listening to someone like you or like me who actually is awake and knows it, but understands that this is about you and your entire psychology, your entire lifelong experience. You can't just transfer that to someone else as if it were just instructions. It doesn't work.
Whatever spiritual practice it's going to engage in, it's hoping that the practice itself will bring about that. Though if it would listen carefully, but that's the catch, it cannot listen carefully in the state it's in. That's one of the thing I'm seeing, is that most people, they're starting from a place where just saying things as they are won't do the trick, to say it like that. They're just not in a condition where it can happen. And some people said, that the I is teaching. I think we find it like in Buddhism, like with Dzogchen and all that. It's for the people who are, almost Buddhas already. So we're talking about those people who are right at the edge, and already one way or another, however that works, they are at the edge. So just hearing what's going on, that does it, you know. But most people, they're not at that place. So my point is, so back to spiritual practice. So one of the catches that people will hear about one practice or the other, and they will, because of the nature of how the mind works and the ego self, the ego activity, they will take it that if I do that practice, then the thing will happen. And we said it, you know, it needs to be repeated time and again. It's not what you do that is going to do anything, because it will always happen when you're actually not concerned about doing anything. It never happens because you're doing something. It always happens when you are not there doing anything. So when you're just having a cup of tea and all that, because I repeat myself, as long as you're there doing something, hoping that what you're doing will get you somewhere, well, that's what you get. You get yourself being there, doing that thing, hoping that it will get you somewhere. So obviously you won't get anything else than yourself doing that thing. But suddenly one day you've been practicing and meditating, you know, 1 hour a day for a number of years and doing this and that practice. And one day, you know, you mentioned one experience you had, you know, people have asked me that, you know, about my awakening or enlightenment, whatever. And I had many that I could all name awakenings. They were different kinds, because as far as I'm concerned, I see that there's no end to it. No end to it means for me also that not only there is, you know, a lot of teachings are based on somebody had a realization, and then in the course of time, you know, they will say that it's, you know, that there's more, but all that's happening is the unpacking of that one realization they have. And that's one way it happens. Definitely it's one way it happens. In fact, many people, they come from that model. But there is another possibility, which is more like, which I feel about my own process, is there were a lot of different awakenings, and there will be more. So for me, realization being endless or awakening being endless doesn't only mean an unpacking of a given awakening. It also means all the kinds of awakening I have no idea about. You know, maybe in 1 hour or tomorrow or in 1 week, an awakening will come that is a totally new order than all the ones I had before, that will in a way not refute them, but, you know, throw me in like another universe where suddenly I will see, wow, you know, I won't deny the value of what happened before, but wow, I hadn't seen that one. One thing that I think is very useful to understand is that practices are specifically addressing something that is not about the awakened state, or whatever we want to call it, life, living being, reality, the enlightened state, whatever you want to call it. It's not about that. I'll give a simple example. There are many forms of practices of presence. They come in many forms. One way or another, you practice. The ego self is practicing being present. Now the ego will take that and will hold that by practicing being present, he will get present one day enough that enlightenment will happen. Well, that's a delusion. We said it, and I mean, I had to see through this one again and again until, you know, 100 times, until I got to a point where finally it wouldn't come up anything, that delusion of thinking that I'm going to get something out of doing something. But for a long time, like I remember one time I had a period of intense meditation in my years in India where I would meditate 7-8 hours a day, literally, like my monk years kind of thing. And one day I'm sitting there on my chair and I've been meditating for I don't know how many hours. And suddenly it hits me. For I don't know, you know, the 100th time or the 1000th time. Suddenly it hits me. What am I doing there? I'm there sitting. I caught myself still. The subtle ego self that was there, that was appropriating the meditation and still doing something. What was the something he was doing? It comes back to something I shared before, Robert. It was, I just do nothing. I'm just sitting here. I'm just sitting. I don't want anything. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not doing anything. The ego self, he wants to survive. He's very subtle. So he comes from the back door and says, okay, now I've got it now. I'm just here. I'm not doing anything. I'm not going anywhere. This is it, says the ego. I've got it. So I was sitting there for hours and suddenly I just saw it. Again, I saw this tiny little speck of dust inside me called the ego self, buzzing around like a mosquito, thinking, I'm still, I'll get it, And then in that moment, suddenly, boom, I was gone, the chair was gone, the room was gone, everything was gone. And then after a while, kind of out of time, slowly mental activity came back up, and slowly the ego self started to articulate. So that's one experience among others. But I want to go back to what I was saying. So practices of presence. Now, a practice of presence is not meant to take you to presence. Obviously, presence already is. You are present. Everything is present. Or here we are, right?
Yes.
Obviously, and on that basis, it would be foolish to make a practice of presence to get to that presence, because by doing a practice of presence, you're actually separating yourself from your presence, which doesn't make any sense. It's like if I would say, let's do a practice to find myself sitting here talking. Well, I'm already sitting here talking. I don't need to do anything to be sitting here looking at the screen and seeing Robert. I'm already sitting here looking at Robert. Yet, so I come back to what I'm saying. A practice of presence is not meant to take you to presence. It doesn't make any sense if you're a little intelligent. It's meant to counteract a lifetime of not being present. Now, to me, that's the point. It's not meant to take you to presence. It's meant to count a life. Right now, most people, what they're doing is unconsciously, they're doing everything up to be here. And they've been practicing that every second of every day for days, for weeks, for months, for years. Somebody is 50 years old and he's been practicing that for 47, 45 years. He's been practicing not being present. Because it comes back to something I said at the beginning in the introduction of this, that each time there's a repression, and the ego self is a lot about repressing stuff, there's a narrowing down of consciousness. There's a narrowing down of presence, talking about presence. So it narrows down, then there's just this little bit of presence left. So there's a lifetime of practicing not being present. And then suddenly teachings comes and teacher come and they say, well, this is it, man, You are present here. You can't deny that. It's already here, There's nothing else. There's nowhere else. That's true. But the problem is that most people, they're at a place where they listen to that and they might intellectually, they get it if they're, have a bit of intelligence still running. They will get it intellectually, but nothing much will happen. And that also takes me back to something I shared at the beginning with Robert. It's for me, it's not only that most, I find, and I went through that process myself, and I find still a vast majority of people, there's so little here. But what do I mean by so little here? It's presence-wise, it's consciousness-wise, it's awareness-wise, it's vitality-wise, it's heart-wise, it's, the constriction, the obstruction, what obscures and obstructs vitality. Sometimes we refer to it as disaliveness. Well, a lot of people, they don't know what that means, or they hear aliveness and yeah, they're not dead yet, so yeah, they're alive, but it's being dimmed down so much on every level. I remember once in a conversation saying to a friend talking about those things, it's like a seed, You put it in the ground, and if the conditions are right, it's going, to crack open and grow into becoming whatever it's meant to become. But you need an healthy seed enough. If you have 50% of a seed or 60%, how much percentage can we say that the seed is still healthy enough that it will work? Maybe you can have a little chip on it missing, but you need, there's a basic sufficient amount of the whole seed and the right environment for it to crack open and grow. So it's a bit that, I use that as an image to say, so, my seed, how much is it present? Well, I find that most people's seed has been so repressed, so oppressed, so depressed. It's a rich root, all those words with press, which I understand as the pressure, the aliveness, the pressure, right? So you depress. What is depression? Too much repression, too much oppression. Take the pressure down, the pressure down, the pressure down. At some point, the pressure is depressed. It's a natural phenomenon. So no wonder more and more people nowadays, because of what's happening on the planet, they just depressed. No wonder how can they not be depressed? They've been so oppressed. They've been so repressed. And they internalize this oppression and the repression that came from mom and dad and the taxi driver and the politicians and the priest and you name it. Now they internalize all that. They don't need anybody anymore to do it for them. They do it on themselves. I don't have to tell you anything, Robert, about what you call the top dog, which is in psychology is called the superego. So we internalize the voice of the superego of our parents and society as a whole, and now it's there within me. It gives me a standard, a range of what I can think, what I can feel, and what I can be. The moment I want to step a little out of that range, the superego comes in, no, back in line. You can't go there, danger. You're going to get in trouble. You're going to suffer. So we have this voice inside, the inner critic, the superego, the top dog, which keep our ego self the same as it is. And the moment we want to go out of that range, heart-wise, emotionally, at the level of ideas even, it gives us a certain, and then we read spiritual books and we meet spiritual teachers and teachings, and then the superego becomes even worse. It becomes a spiritual superego, and now you're in trouble.
Well, let me interrupt you there, because that is the crux. The crux of the matter is that spiritual seeker is an identity that is totally repressive, because what you're being asked to do is to deny big parts of ordinary experience.
Absolutely.
Because they're not spiritual enough. They're not spiritual enough. A great deal, we haven't really discussed spiritual teaching very much, but a great part of spiritual teaching involves not being sexual. And all of that, to my mind, that's poison. I don't mean that everyone has to be sexually active all the time. That's not the point. But we are sexual beings. We're born that way. When an infant only a few days old or a few weeks old sees the breast approaching, it squirms with delight. By the time it's 6 months old, it knows how to masturbate by touching parts of its body that give pleasure. So this is how we begin. We begin with a nipple in our mouths and touching parts of our body that give us pleasure. And the idea is, if I keep doing that, then I can never awaken. And this is silly. If we awaken, that has to be part of it. Any spiritual teaching that leaves something out, or that says you mustn't be angry, you mustn't be sexual, you mustn't be irreverent, or whatever this is, it's no good. It's just no good. Okay, now you and I, we could do this forever, Bernard, but we've been at it for an hour, more than an hour. And what we've arrived at is the via negativa, which, there's no path exactly. A path has to suit you, and how can you really be present if you try to be present? All of this, it's very difficult. We've been,
Yeah, but Robert, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying, I see a usefulness to many practice. The problem is we need a very precise understanding of what the practice is about.
yeah. Look, I have a spiritual practice. I really do. I mean, I can't deny it. I wouldn't deny
Well, I would say that somebody like you and me, it got to a point where, in a real sense, we can say that practice is every second of the day.
Yeah, exactly.
Our practice is just the way we live.
That's right. That's the point.
There's a beautiful...
See, I could state my practice in words. Someone could come to me and say, Robert, give me, what do you do? Give me a practice. I can tell you my practice. But I don't know what you do with that. I will tell you my practice. It's very simple. Just be open and welcoming to whatever arises without judging whether it's good for you or bad for you, because that judgment may be incorrect. It may be hasty. Sometimes the things that seem the worst possible thing for us may turn out eventually to be wonderful, and vice versa. So what I do is non-judgmentally just accept whatever's coming at me. Whatever I have to deal with, I will just say, okay, now this is happening. Now, it sounds simple. It is simple. But if I recommend that to someone else, that person, I have done. And the answer usually is, well, if I did that, I would never get anything done. Or what about all this suffering in the world? I'm supposed to fix that, or whatever it is. Maybe you are. And if you are, then that would be part of the practice. The feeling of wanting to fix it would arise, and you'd say, okay, that's arising. I'll do something. See, but this is so hard. It's so hard to pin down. So I don't know if it's too early, you tell me, but I'd like to recommend that we take a 5-minute break and then take questions.
Yeah, we can do that.
Are you up for that?
Yeah, or maybe before we do the 5-minute break, I'd like to add something.
Okay.
You know, one basic point of view that really changed for me my whole view about practice. You know, Dogen said something, I don't know if you read Dogen, but for me, he said many interesting things that set him apart for people who are not aware of Dogen. Dogen is one of the pretty renowned Zen master. If my memory is good, he's at the root of the old Soto Zen school. So he's pretty famous and revered, Dogen. And he said many beautiful things. One of the things he said is, practice is realization, realization is practice. You know, what does that mean for me is he's saying that it's really down to the way you express it, Robert, that everything is just happening on its own. You know? The totality of reality is obviously, for anybody that really stops and looks, just a constant, instantaneous, spontaneous happening. So on the basis of that, it means that first, they are not, the ego self thinks, I am me as a separate person. Well, that's a delusion, because really the only thing that is here is, call it what you want. I like the word reality because it's very simple. No, all that is here is reality appearing as the 10,000 things. To bring that up. Then reality also appears as a human being. Then in some human beings, reality also appears as suddenly an interest in spiritual things. Then in some human beings that have where it appears as an interest in spiritual things, a drive to practice arises. It's still all the same reality that is being all that, doing all that. So there was, in truth, there was never someone who practiced. There is never someone who practices. There will never be someone who practices. because there was never someone to begin with separate from the reality, which is being everything that happens. So to me, if I look at my own story, that's exactly how it happened. I didn't make myself up. I didn't make me. It started with a book from Gurdjieff. That's what really, sparked thing. I didn't make Gurdjieff up. I didn't make Uspensky, who wrote that book. I didn't make my brother, who took a plane and brought that book back from France and left it on the kitchen table, which I didn't make. I'm not the one who made me pick that book and start to read it. I'm not the one who created this something that woke up inside me and said, oh, what's this? So the beginning of this interest in those ideas, I didn't produce that. I didn't create that. I'm not the one who made me, and you see where I'm going. So to me, like Dogen says, practice is realization. Realization is practice. He's saying something profound here. He's saying that it's already, call it what you want, realization, awakening reality, that is being the whole thing, that is coming up in some human beings. It's coming up as some human beings. In some of those human beings, it's coming up as this interest into awakening, or call it what you want. And in some of them, it makes them practice this way or that. In some of them, it makes them need this teacher or that teacher, which is also one of the way the same reality shows up as. We can deny the value of teachers and all that, and saying, yeah, it's true. Like Robert says, they're not going to give it to you. And yet I can't deny the role that all the teachers, which were quite a few that I hang out with to different periods of time, played in my own journey. Robert can't deny the place that, what was his name, Mr. Chappell, played in his own thing. And it's true, it's not that he could give it to Robert, or it's not like Robert could, take it from him like if it's a thing. Yet we can't deny the impact that it had on our own process, on our own journey to meet such people and spend some time with them, hang out with them. It's more like somebody said once, and I kind of like that. The good thing with hanging out with them, well, apart from what they might say and all this, is it's like they cannot give it to you, you cannot grab it from them, but you might catch it, so something might happen. It's a happening. You might, something like catching a cold or something.
Yeah.
Hanging out.
Yeah. Good company is helpful. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit wary of the idea of spiritual teaching. Walter Chappell, who was my mentor, Walter, yes, he wouldn't have called himself a teacher. He would not. In the same way that I would not call myself a teacher. What he was an awake person who was living a life, and I was allowed to be his friend and observe what it's like to live an awakened life, which is very different from the life that I was leading at that time, very different. And gradually, it's not that you imitate or you copy, you can't, but you see that there's a possibility. There's the possibility of man's future evolution, or whatever. I think that was Uspensky. Yeah. But as I say, we could go on forever. But we're almost half into it. We're going to take a 5-minute break, and when we return, the floor will be open to questions.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, here I am again. We'll wait for people to show up. I used to be a physical risk taker. I like to do dangerous things. I had a motorcycle, I'd drive at 120 miles an hour, stuff like that.
Right.
Well, I've gotten over that, but I did a scuba dive once where I went to twice the sport diving limit. It's pretty dangerous. You can get the bends pretty easily. I did it with another guy, a kid. He was a very young guy. I think he was 17 and I was probably 35. Well, we did this dive together. This was in the Caribbean. And in about 30 feet of water, suddenly the bottom dropped, sandy bottom, suddenly the bottom dropped off. And there was this cliff, and it was maybe a mile deep in the ocean. And what you do on this kind of dive is you don't swim, you just control your buoyancy so that you sink at a very slow rate.
Right.
As we did this, you see this wall, and it's filled with little niches and holes and all kinds of spaces. And what you see is that in those, every one of those spaces is filled somehow by some life forms making a living. Every niche has activity in it, living activity. And that's kind of how I see the human race. That's why I don't look down on religion. There are niches where there's a lot of religious stuff going on. There's other mathematicians are over here. They have no thought of God except 2 + 2 = 4 is God, whatever it is. And that's how we are.
Yeah, I see the same thing, Robert. You know, when I said before the break, when I talk about, you know, the fact that as far as I can see, you know, back to saying, you know, everything happens. So part of this happening of all that happens is reality shows up as all those different spiritual paths and approaches, you know, and you know, as years are passing, I'm recognizing more and more that that's just the reality. And you know, some people will say, it's a bit like the story of the elephant and the 10 people in the dark room with the elephant. And one is they're all touching different parts. So some people will say that, well, each spiritual path is you know, pressing or manifesting different part of the same reality. I wouldn't quite say it like that. What I see is totality of reality that is showing up as every single thing, you know.
Okay, I'm
Path or that path.
having some internet problems. I guess on my end, it says my connection is unstable.
Well,
They're speaking about my internal connection or the internet connection.
well, it's working fine from my side, Robert.
Okay. So,
Oh yeah, just to finish, yeah. So I said what I wanted to say. I agree with you. For me, it's like from a blade of grass. Was it William Blake? You know, you'll find the whole universe in a blade of grass.
yeah.
To the whole cosmos, it's the totality of reality showing up as this thing and that thing and that thing and that path. And to me, that practice and that practice and
Okay.
whatever works for anybody, well, wonderful.
So that's where you and I coincide, and that's beautiful. So we're going to have the meeting open now. A lot of people wait to hear the recording of this. There's only about 20 of us here, but or something like that. But thousands of people are going to view this on YouTube. So I'd like to give them a clean experience. So I see Chris. Chris, you're the first one on the list. So turn on your microphone, please. Introduce yourself and have at it.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Hey, amazing. This technology is crazy. This is my first time doing this.
Hey, Chris.
Hey, first, before anything, I just, I feel so fortunate to have you people here, and I've had the chance to write to you, and I really have learned a lot, and you guys have been a big part of my life these last few years. So thank you. Thanks a lot, really. It's wonderful. All I can say is the thing I find myself doing is noticing how I don't want to accept that this is it. I keep finding myself thinking, there's got to be more than this. what, it's just this, and it's just there. I can't help feeling that way. It comes up. I keep thinking I should have some big giant experience, but I do find lately I'm more just going, well, it is what it is, and there's not a lot I can do about it. I've pretty much done everything, and I'm finding a little peace in that. And like Robert, one thing you've said a lot is, it happens when it happens, and that's the way the cookie crumbles. And that just makes so much sense. Not that I always go along with that. I still find myself wanting to try. And then I want to find myself trying to not do. I'm like, but that's doing. And I just kind of, it's just kind of fun at a certain point. And anyway, thank you.
Maybe I'd like to respond something, Chris, to that. I mean, did you read my famous ice cream post? Right, you read that, eh? Well, there's two ways one can look at it. One way would be what I said before, you know. For me, it's the totality of reality, and for me, it's an obvious thing, and at least intellectually, we can follow that. That is showing up as anything that is happening in your experience. So whatever is the content of your experience here and now, this is all our reality is manifesting, expressing itself through you as you, right? So that's one way to look at it. Well, no, actually, that's good enough that way. So for me, that would mean then, of course, the question can come up, you know, that, well, that's nothing special, you know, so, you know, and then you meet those guys, you know, people like Robert or me, and, you know, I haven't shared much of that, but I had many awakening, and some of them were really mind-blowing, you know. Like, I'm walking, you know, an example, I'm walking down outside a cafeteria with my tray in my hand, right? And I'm walking between the tables, and I'm totally relaxed just being there. I just got my dinner, you know, walking to find a spot to sit. And then suddenly it's like if I'm walking into a totally different reality. So I stop in my tracks, and then I look around, and it stayed in my mind because it was momentous enough, you know. I look up, it was a beautiful day, you know, sunny, and it was in India. The wind, trees and the sun and the wind is blowing. So I stop in my tracks and I look up, and the wind is blowing in the tree, and suddenly, wow, I'm the tree, and I'm the wind blowing on it, and I'm the sunlight on it. And then I look around, and I'm all over the place, right? So suddenly I had an experience of this the presence that typically is limited to my skin, the skin of the body, because the ego self is a body self, really. You know, it experiences itself as bound by the skin, because at the core, that's a psychological finding, at the core of the self-image, there's really a body image, right? We won't go more into that. So suddenly I was for some reason, I was not looking for it. It always happens when you don't look for it, like I said. And you know that. If you are there looking for it, then that's what you get. But suddenly I'm just walking there outside the cafeteria, and suddenly I'm all over the place. So, you know, we hear about those experiences, and then, you know, then the question comes up, well, you know, I don't experience anything special. So what I want to say is that inquiry, you know, Robert said, you know, what is his practice, which is, and I can totally go along with it, which is, what is, what ain't. So this is it. Whether you don't accept it, well, take that in too. There's a part of it that is not right. You don't understand, take that part in too. Whatever is, including whatever part doesn't feel happy with how it is, this is how it is. But that ice cream post adds one element to it, which is central to my life since by now a long time, 20-something years, which is it's also possible to inquire into the content of your moment-to-moment experience. And then, if you really honestly, to stay with the everything happens, if you really happen to be somebody that hear those words and something, lights up there, an interest, the interesting thing about inquiry is that as it is the whole of reality showing up as the content of your own experience, whatever it is, if you follow the thread of your own experience, it will take you all the way. Because what else are you going to find? Who else are you going to find than that which is here? And there is no end to that. For me, the mind-blowing thing about the practice of inquiry, because at the beginning, it's like a practice, looks like a practice. But as you get into it, it becomes, to me, it's a way of life. And as I said at some point, it's the totality. When I'm sitting and inquiring, it's the totality of the cosmos that is sitting and inquiring. Because it is the whole reality that is manifesting as whatever manifests. So the beauty of inquiry is there's no end to the treasure you can find. Because it's open and open-ended. We're not inquiring to get enlightened or get this and that. You just want to find out. I'm feeling sad, let's say. Or you have this question that I feel like something is missing. Right now, I would do an inquiry with you, because that's something you can do with two people. Then it's called dialectic inquiry. And then we just start with what is, Oh, what do you mean by that? We're just zooming in. You're not doing anything. You just want to find out more about what's the truth of your experience. That's all.
Bernard, that's the epistemological investigation right there.
Yeah, but it's also, for me, it's also a hard thing.
Of course it is.
You love the truth. You want to, not truth, capital T, like we say.
Yeah.
Truth for me is just what is, It's like you just have, it's like a love affair. It's like, hey, it's my life after all,
So I think the approach that you just mentioned to Chris is very right on. I'd like to also address your question just for a moment, Chris. You and I had some very interesting dialogues. It was years ago about riding the bicycle and all this. I still remember all that stuff. Very good, very good. And certainly your questions were very acute. I mean, you forced me to sharpen up my own verbal understanding. I should get into that at some point today. But what I'd like to say to you is that Bernard's approach is great. I would recommend that. And another approach I would recommend that the ego self actually can do, not completely, you can't get to the end of it, but you can work with it. And that is to understand how impermanent all of this is. So that if in this moment you are feeling, this isn't enough, this is really it, this is all, I have to just accept this. No, you don't. Because in the next moment, it might be so rich that you can't even imagine that in this moment. I mean, life is like that, is it not? I'm sure you've had peak experiences, yeah? The next peak experience might be just around the corner, see? And that's the richness of just wanting to expand into it, into the role. Bernard was saying his experience now as an awake human is that when he does something, it's the whole universe doing it. Well, I have that experience also. But it sounds egotistical when I'm the whole universe. No, that's not it.
Well, one thing I like to say about it, Robert, is when I use I now, all we mean is in this location.
Yeah.
As opposed to that location. We just mean this location.
Yeah, you also mentioned something else and you pushed it aside, but I think this is important for certain people if they hear it and understand it. Inside of the self-image is a body image. Try to understand that. It's a key fact. It's a key fact. If you can really understand the meaning of that, that could go a long, long way. That's highly important. I'm glad you brought that up, Bernard.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to say this about words in general, because we're using a lot of them today. And I hear people all the time demeaning, spiritual people demeaning spoken language as if it somehow distracts or them from being here now. And really nothing could be further from the truth. I'm reminded of Socrates' trial for impiety and for corrupting youth. And Plato wrote about this in the Apologia, and it's worth reading. He was convicted of corrupting the youth, and he was given, his sentence was, he was given a choice, either to leave Athens forever and never return, that was one choice, or never speak on this subject again. He had to remain silent except for ordinary buy the groceries or whatever it is. Other than that, no more philosophizing, no more discussion. That was the choice he was given. And I don't know which one you would choose, but the one that Socrates chose is very interesting. He drank hemlock and died. Now, what are we to make of that? Well, I'll tell you what I make of it. He felt that without being able to discuss these things, there was no real life. And the way that he put that was, the unexamined life is not worth living. So what we're doing here is not trying to awaken. We're examining life to find out about it, not to get to some destination. Oh, Robert's so cool, he's got this kind of mind. That's not it. That's not it. It has nothing to do with that. I'm in the same boat as everyone else at the meeting. It's an open, the horizons are expanding. We're all in this for the same reason. We want to find out, what the fuck is this all about, see? And I think if we just stay on that and don't worry so much about method, then we'll do what Socrates did. I don't mean drink the hemlock, I mean awaken. All right, well, I don't know how helpful that is, Chris, but there it is. Okay, on the list is Danny. And Chris,
Hey.
before I turn it over to Dan, I just want to say thank you for your kind words. It's very heartwarming, really, to feel that something that one has said is meaningful to another human. It's kind of a deal. And I really appreciate your awareness and your presence.
Yeah, me too, Chris. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Once again, to have someone to share this with, to see things in a new way, to shed light on it, to be encouraging, and that's what you both have been. It's just wonderful. It's amazing. And like Robert, one of the things I often say is, in this moment, things are as they are and can be no different. You have no idea how much peace that has given me. It's just mind-blowing peace. It's like, hey, this is how it is. You can't argue with it. It is what it is. It's incredibly powerful, and it's really sunk in. And then Bernard, the being, that it's about just beingness, and instead of just thinking about it.
But that would include, if you argue with it, well, that's part of it. You are arguing with it.
That's right. It's all part of it. And, nothing's excluded. There's no other place it could be. It's just, this is it, period. And yet there's still this part that wants to, well, no.
Chris, Bernard has made this point several times now, and I don't know if you're really hearing it in its fullness. That is also, that's not separate from everything else. It's all, this is the human experience is ambiguity. And
right.
Spiritual people think they're supposed to clear that up. See, I want to be ambiguous. I want to have this one truth and I'll stick to it.
Right,
and
right.
My guru gave it to me, and since he has 10,000 followers, it must be true. That's
Another simple answer, Chris, would be, so there's this part of you that said there must be more to it. Go have a look.
Right, keep looking.
Right.
Have a look.
I just want to make one more response to you, Chris. You say, I have no idea how much peace that brings to say, In this moment, things are as they are and can be no different in this moment. You say, I have no idea, but actually I have a total idea. That's what occurred in this awakening. You know, Bernard says there are many awakenings. Yes, that's true. I had this one, you know, because I was kind of hung up and I needed maybe a real hard demonstration. Who knows why that happened that way? It blew my mind. But I was on an ego trip, to be frank, before that happened, and it got me off it pretty quick. So, I do have a total understanding, because that is how I deal with the physical suffering that every life has. It's unavoidable. This body decays. That's impermanence, yes? Yes. And so at the end of life, which is where I am, near it, that suffering increases. But if you really have practiced all these years just allowing what is to be, there's no resistance. There isn't. And when I'm around other people who are ill and I watch how terrible it is, because it's not just the pain. Pain is pain, but this is something else. They're just feeling, this is so unfair. Why does this have to happen to me, or whatever it is? But all along, myself, has understood that this is the human condition. I'll just say thanks again, Chris. And now, Danny, you've been so patient.
I kind of see, well, the thing about coming to see that there is no doer is kind of what I'm trying to do. So I'm also kind of listening to the Krishnamurti guys, and they're saying, like, one of them is saying the thinker is the thought, and and the other guy is kind of saying that the thought sphere is like a globe, you know. Anyway, so what I'm trying to say is that I kind of see that, well, I'm kind of like trying to sneak up on my thoughts to see that the thoughts are actually, like, me seeing my thoughts is not really actually a me seeing my thoughts. It's more a thought that there's a me there seeing my thought. So there's kind of like an activity going on here where I'm trying to sneak up on my thoughts to see through the illusion that I am thinking my thoughts, that I'm the author of this stuff. So this is kind of like what I'm trying to do. And I'm just asking, I guess, if that's like, I don't know, like if that's like decent activity, or if, you know.
So your question is what?
So my question is it true that there's nothing else happening? My experience right now, is it let's say the way I feel about my identity, my personality, whatever I want to call myself, is that just a thought?
Is it, you're asking, is that just a thought?
Yeah. Am I just a thought this very moment? I mean, like, because the way I see it, there's an aliveness here that is probably well, you know, the whole experience is.
I'm going to recommend that you read Bernard's ice cream post. I'll get a link for it in the description.
I've seen the ice cream. I can find it.
Okay, well then, but what Bernard is saying, if I understand him correctly, I'm pretty sure I do. He can correct me. He's here, so he's not like the Buddha anyone can quote, and he's dead, so he can't critique it. What Bernard is saying is that there's a way of entering into feelings that aren't thoughts. They're not thoughts. You're not just thought. You're also feelings, yearnings, and those aren't thoughts. And they're not. In fact, by concentrating on them as a practice, this is a popular practice to allow the stream of thoughts to just be what it is. And meanwhile, my intention, my good Freudian slip, my intention might be somewhere else entirely. I may be feeling feelings in my belly that I don't usually, I'm not aware of ordinarily. And maybe those feelings will teach me things that are wordless. Maybe. Is that kind of what you were aiming at, Bernard? Do I have it?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's one way we can respond to what Danny is saying. I mean, one thing that is coming up for me, Danny, is, I practice meditation in all kinds of ways in my journey. As I change, it changed, right? So I did many, I understand meditation as two things. There's meditation and there's confusion there for a lot of people. There's meditation as a practice and there's meditation as a state. So generally speaking, there are 1001 meditation practice. They are meant to take you in a place where meditation as a state might happen. And what I mean by meditation as a state is your beingness or the presence, that is this aliveness and all that. To me, it's constantly in a state of meditation by the virtue of always being present and being itself. That's what I call meditation. So from that point of view, one of the best way I would formulate what meditation is, because in a way that's, from what I hear you saying, that's kind of what you're doing or what you're aiming at. It's like a meditation or a contemplation, right? You're like trying to do something to understand or see something. So at this point, the best way I would formulate what is the practice of meditation, it's nothing else but the natural, spontaneous, instantaneous awareness or consciousness or awareness of the ego activity inside, of wanting, of desiring, of holding on, of rejecting. It is possible to be aware of all this ego activity because it is not simply being. You understand what I mean? It's not just something that is just being there. It's not just the presence of being, call it whatever you want, that is just simply being there, that is never trying to be anything else because it already is. So there is we could call that a practice of meditation, which would be, it's nothing else than the simple, spontaneous, natural awareness of that whole movement happening in the mind, of the ego activity, what I like to call ego activity, by which the ego self perpetuates itself. It perpetuates itself by being active, whether we realize that or not. But one can be aware of all this activity. And if you allow yourself to just be aware of all this activity, well, the beingness that is your presence is not all this activity. Like Robert was saying, more from the point of view of the ice cream post, there can be all this thought activity. Well, I take it and, I take it like expanding this view. You can see the whole activity of thought process of desiring and wanting and holding on and pushing away, holding on to a good experience because I like it, or pushing away an experience because I don't like it, or whatever thought, the thought of the ego self, wanting to understand thought and wanting to understand whether the thinker is the thought. All this, you can be aware of all this activity. How come you can be aware of all this ego activity? Because it is not simply being, right? Because being is not an activity. Being is just something that is there. And it's not trying to do anything, it just simply is there. And the more you allow yourself to simply be there, spontaneously aware of the ego activity, the more you give yourself a chance, the more you see the gap there is between the ego activity and the beingness, the more you give yourself a chance to suddenly wake up to the fact that, wow, I am the presence of this being. aware of all this ego activity.
Mhm. Let me ask you one thing, Bernard, because
Yeah.
Robert was saying to attend to the feelings,
Yeah.
to put your attention on the feelings.
Yeah, that was more from the point of view of inquiry, right?
Yeah, okay. So so it's not about doing those things simultaneously. What you are saying, kind of falling back and seeing that there's kind of like a presence here, whatever I'm doing.
Yeah, but you see, falling back and see there's a presence here, this is still part of the ego activity.
Yeah.
You have to listen to the definition very carefully.
Yeah.
That meditation I'm talking about is nothing but the spontaneous, natural, and simple awareness. So I'm not saying it's you are doing the awareness.
No.
We're saying that it's nothing but the spontaneous, natural. What do we mean by spontaneous, natural? It means you don't need to do anything. It's already there. You are looking at me right now. There's awareness. So that meditation is nothing but the natural, spontaneous awareness of the movement of the ego activity. Wanting to get this or that, or not wanting this or that, wanting to understand this or that, or blah, 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 blah. You can just be aware of all this, and it's not a doing. Or let's rephrase that, it's tricky. I catch myself with the words. It is possible for that being to just be aware of all this because it is simply being.
Mm-hmm.
There's absolutely nothing to do. But I tell you, part of that will be to see the ego activity as, I mean, it happened for me 1,000,000 times, Danny. I would sit for meditation and by then, you know, at some point I really got that when I sit, I'm just sitting. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not doing anything. But I would catch it again and again. This ego self, ego activity coming from the back door, still expecting something from my sitting, right? So this is part of what we're saying, of what I'm saying.
Yes.
It is possible. There's a meditation where it is possible that it's only the spontaneous awareness. So that implies we're not doing anything. It's there spontaneously. Spontaneous awareness of all the ego activity, the becoming, the desiring, the wanting, the not wanting, the whatever it is. And it's possible to be aware of all that because being is naturally aware. It's inherently aware. It's spontaneously conscious. It's present, it's conscious.
Yeah, very
The
good.
more there is the awareness of all this ego activity, the more there is a perception of the gap between the simple awareness and the activity. And the more you allow yourself to just be there with that reality of that gap, the more you give yourself a chance that suddenly there starts to be insights. Now, the ice cream pose that Robert was bringing in, that's another story for me. This is about the curiosity about wanting to start to know more about the truth of my experience. And this has to do, this is more, you start more like with the felt sense in the body.
Say that again. The stealth.
It's more with the felt sense of the body when you inquire. The thoughts are allowed and they might provide useful information too. I mean, if my mind is talking about, I really miss love, well, okay, so that's part of what's happening here and now. But then, you know, then I would come back to the body and say, where do I miss that? What do I mean in the felt sense, in experiential sense, that I miss love?
Yeah, Bernard, I brought. Forgive me for interrupting. I brought that up.
Okay.
I brought that up because Danny's question to me, when I asked him, "What is your question?" he said, "Well, these thoughts. Am I just thought?" That seemed to be the
Right. Yeah.
And what I'm saying is no. And
Right.
if you don't need a spiritual teacher to tell you that. What we need, all of us, is to become aware of more than, it's like a lot of people are walking around like their head is a balloon, you know, it's just long string and this thing's floating around. that's not really what it is. You take a shit in the morning and all of this. We have to be aware of this as part of my being. See that? And this does not deny that thought could be important. Some thoughts are important, others aren't. But there's also this other thing going on constantly. And the brain and intelligence is running it, beating the heart, digesting the food, all of this, that's you. That is you. That's why I call it this aliveness. If someone asks me, Robert, who are you? I am this aliveness. That includes all of it. It includes thoughts and feelings, fears, anxiety.
What you're saying, Robert, for me brings up, something which is a bit part of the calamity that is happening in this modern age, because I think maybe it was less happening before, is if we talk about like the three centers in a Gurdjieff way, the belly center, the heart center, and the head center, it's like the head center has become overdeveloped at the cost of the two other centers. So there's a tendency in modern mind to be over-intellectualizing things, when the reality, like you say, there's also the feeling part, and there's the sensations of the body, and there's so many other things going on, to come back to what you're saying, answering Danny, than just the thought process,
And they're just as meaningful as anything else.
Right.
Thought could be overvalued. But now, since we're speaking truth here, not the truth, but speaking truthfully, I think what you're feeling about how the golden age has just passed or whatever, I think that's a function of aging, to tell you the truth. Where you and I'm deeply into the Saturnine view of the world that you get into in your 70s. I think you might be on the verge. It's when you look back and see what has been lost, except it's only been lost to you, to the fresh one, just in this world. This is the world. And when they're 70, they'll look back on it and say, boy, it was so great when I was a kid. We only had forest fires like a few hundred times a year. Now it's the whole planet's on fire. I think it's age.
I hear you.
And also the wisdom that you bring to it and that I bring to it. Part of it is what you call awakening, but part of it is just age. You've been around, you've been kicked around and pushed around, and yes. Well, Danny, you're still on.
Yeah, I think I'm happy with your answers.
Yeah, there's a lot to chew right there.
Yeah, when you were saying about this kind of, non-doing, let's say, do you for me, it's kind of, I'll be honest, it's very difficult for me to sit down and, let's say, meditate without making that into, a chore activity kind of thing. Do you think that's necessary?
Well, first thing I would say is that it's a problem for a lot of people. There's so much nervousness. It's like they're so away from their own being, which being is peace and relaxation and all that, that they're like hyper all the time, which is one of the things you become aware of. You just allow yourself just to be there, talking about the ego activity is one. Yeah. You'll also become aware on a physical level that there's all this agitation going on. So the first thing that comes up is run around the block 7 times at full speed. And then you'll be able to sit for 10 minutes, And I'm joking, and yet I'm not joking also, I'm somebody, for instance, who danced a lot in my life. I love dancing. I could have become a dancer. I really love dancing. So find your own way to let some of that agitation express itself. That would be a creative way to look at that, If you love dancing, dance your art out for 20 minutes, then you'll be exhausted. Find a way to exhaust yourself to a degree that then you'll just be happy. Like somebody who really work hard all day long, and then at the end of the day, he lies down on his bed and wow, he's just so happy. because he really, was active so much. So that would be one thing,
So in a sense, you're saying that it's good to actually sit. Not you cannot replace that with going for a walk.
Well, for me, it's not. It might be a practice at some point, but it's just a natural thing. We sit, we walk, we talk. I mean, this is life. Like me, I still tend to have moments where I find myself just sitting. It stayed with me. But at any moment of the day, walking, talking, sitting in a cafe, having coffee, suddenly everything drops and I'm just being there. So it can happen sitting, it can happen walking, it can happen talking. As I'm talking now, I'm also very aware of the presence of being that is just being there, not doing anything. So it's simultaneously, it's talking, but there's also a dimension of it where it's just being there, and it's not talking, and it never talk, and it will never talk, because there's our dimension of the being where it has nothing to do with talking, right? It's just being there. So so I don't make it an absolute thing as you have to sit. Sitting is part of life, but it can be a useful practice at some point. And then we're back to, if it's too much, there's too much agitation, then, find your own way to, that would also tie back to some stuff I shared at the beginning of the meeting. In my own understanding, Danny, a lot of us were loaded. We're loaded with unexpressed emotion, unexpressed energies. At some point, Robert brought up sexuality. That's a big one for a lot of people. They were never really allowed in that society and all that, with religions as they are, to really express fully their sexuality and flow in that. So, somebody who has a very satisfying, in a real sense, sexual life will have no problem just sitting. Because one of the functions of sexuality, when it's lived fully enough, is to discharge.
That's just brilliant, Bernard. I love that.
Yeah.
I want to add this, because we really should move on. There's so many people. But I'd like to just add, Danny, if you only meditate for 5 seconds, that's good too. If you're brushing your teeth and suddenly you become aware, hey, I'm here, that's very big. It is. Walter Chappelle, one of the most brilliant things he ever said to me about meditation, he was a practitioner, like Bernard. He'd spent, I don't know, thousands of hours at it, And I have meditated, but I've never been that devoted to it. But here's what he said. Each time you remember yourself, that's one point. And you may remember yourself now, and then a long time passes and you're just lost, and then, you remember yourself. That's another point. He said, if you keep doing that, sooner or later, you'll have a page filled with lots of points. Now, all you have to do is connect the dots and you get the picture.
Beautiful.
Now and another thing that he said to me was, it's like filling a bucket. You're going to fill it drop by drop. The first thing you need to do is make sure there's no hole in the bucket. You have to patch it up. And that's psychological work, psychotherapy work. That is, as Bernard's saying, having some kind of sexual presence of your own, not relationships, but just that you understand your animal nature because you've explored it. That's important. That's a hole in the bucket for a lot of people. You get that patched up, and now these moments of awareness, however slow they come, that's not the point. The bucket will fill. It might take a long time. It might take a short time. That's not the point. That's not the point. And it's your bucket. See, those are all your experiences. They're not Krishnamurti's experience or whomever. He had his thing. Robert Saltzman has his thing, but you have to have Danny's thing. That's what it is. And as soon as we understand that, this is your account with life. This is you. We deeply understand that. This is myself. The Robert that you see on the screen talking and everything is part of you. I have my own body image, as Bernard was referring to. I have my own understanding of this chit chat. You don't have that. You can't. You can have your understanding of it, and that is you. And as soon as we get that, this is your bank account. I'm not going to put any money in it. I can't. You have to. You're the one that puts the money in the account. And when you get enough in the account, wow, I'm a millionaire. I'm starting to have fun. Bernard, it's just such a pleasure to have you here. Your comments, I don't know if you call yourself a spiritual teacher. I think you kind of are one. Your comments are very useful, helpful pointers.
Well, we both know, Robert, that, tang the tang that fills us all, like I would say.
That's right.
We owe everything. For me, there's one single teacher, and call it what you want. He manifests as everything and has me, and he teaches every being through being all of them and whatever manifests in their life. It's an obvious thing for me.
Yeah, this is this point where you and I somehow, we don't, even though we agree on so many things, that one eludes me. I understand it. I mean, intellectually,
Yeah,
of course.
I'm sure you do.
But I don't feel it. I really don't feel, as far as I know, as far as I feel, there's no outside force at all.
I'm not talking about any outside force.
Okay, we shouldn't do this.
I'm talking about this force that is manifesting you and me and everything all around ourselves.
We'll do this one at the next Zoom.
Thank you both.
No, there's people, I want to at least recognize everyone once. I see that Vic is the next person on the list. Are you wanting to speak, Vic?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
It's one small thing. I'm not sure if it's relevant to this particular discussion because I never heard Chris's question. I was away at that point, but it's just one thing that I find curious, and I'd just like to know. You in the last couple of meetings, you've held a Vajra in your. I think. Oh, you've got it there. Yeah, I thought you put it down. But I'm just curious why you hold that. I know it's the Vajrayana tradition, isn't it? The Vajra. And I'm just wondering why you hold that. Is it you feel it's some sort of positive experience? Does it influence your practice, if you like? And I'm just being curious about it.
No, it has nothing to do with that. I mean, I did study it, some. I hang out with a few Rinpoches and I read some books. This Vajra was just given to me as a gift, or I bought it. I have it since a long time. And somehow I just find myself fiddling with it every now and then. But it really, it doesn't have any much bearing on what I say or what I have to say. But I understand the question,
I just wonder what is the significance of that? It means a kind of directness, doesn't it? Cutting through.
Well, the Vajra, one of the, I'm not even that, I read about it a long time ago, the symbology related to it. And one of the things I think even the word Vajra means is something like lightning, or something like that. So it does stand for cutting through, cutting through as far as, having insights and seeing things as they are and all that. So, I've read about it, but really, honestly, Vic, it doesn't hold that much significance. It just happens to be something that came in my life, and I kind of took a liking to it, and
I just wondered if you kind of had a feeling for a bit of magic with it all,
Oh no, nothing. It's not a magic wand, It's a piece of metal related to a certain tradition.
Oh,
I could have ended up with, as far as I'm concerned, I could have ended up, well, first with nothing, but I could have ended up with, a Sufi beads, prayer beads, or whatever. It just happened. There's nothing more to it, really.
Yeah. Well, I like your lighting, Vic. It looks like you're in hell. Is that?
The color.
Yeah, it's just poor lighting. I was just noticing as I was building up to asking the question, how you can, it seems like you can be overtaken by the ego, the fears around that, especially if you're very conscious of yourself, talking and seeing yourself. It's, I mean, again, I don't know if this is relevant to the discussion, but I just tried to be aware of how I was before I asked the question. And it's interesting how I can be completely taken over by the ego and try and be with it, but it's more concerned around what will they think, how do they see me, and it's so easily distracted from being, it seems. But then that's part of the being, isn't it? It's staying with that as well, I suppose.
Well, exactly, Vic. Exactly. It's very, in the course of years, it's quite a while now, but being aware of all the ways that the ego self is splitting reality.
Yeah.
This is very interesting. We're splitting right and left in reality, which is unsplittable in so many ways. And it's all a mental operation. Should be like this, should be like that. This is spiritual, this is not. This is part of me, this is the real me, this is not. I mean, the sooner we're given to start to see through all the ways we're splitting, and we're doing it from the point of view of the ego, we're doing it a lot. In a real sense, you could say that it couldn't exist, this ego activity as we know it, if it wasn't for splitting. It's like it's this constant polarizing, good, bad, I want, I don't want, spiritual, mundane, ego, being, relative, absolute, and on and on and on.
So Bernard, forgive me. Let's press on, and after we've been through it through the list once, we can.
Yeah. Good.
Okay.
Go for it, Robert. Thank you, Vic.
Yeah, I'm not really the best moderator. I'm just hanging in and doing the best.
Good, good, Robert.
All right.
Thank you,
I think Barbara. Thank you, Vic. I think. Let's see. Alan, you are the next one on the list. Are you wanting to speak?
I don't really have any questions at the moment, but thanks for offering me the opportunity.
Oh, you're quite welcome. So then we have Barbara. Are you?
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Bernard.
My pleasure.
Barbara, are you wanting to speak? If so, turn on your microphone and join the party.
Barbara.
Okay, we'll go to Gretel. Are you here, Gretel? And would you like to participate?
Yeah, I only want to thank you for giving me so much to chew on. Yeah. So I enjoyed reading and rereading your book, Robert, and I'm enjoying these dialogues. And yes, they are very helpful for me to keeping on doing what I find myself doing. This exploration, which your book surely is very important for me, by pointing my tendency to look for a consolation, as you said, for a search for a coherence, for looking for a meaning, and not staying with as we said, with things as they are now, for me now, with my Bernard spoke about the felt sense. When I I can draw in this felt sense. Now, then also this question, what am I? What is this all that's happening? Then it happened that this, I can experience, I can be with this acceptance you talk about, this radical acceptance, but I don't know if that's a practice. I don't call it a practice. So thank you.
Oh, Gretel, so where are you speaking from, Gretel, by the way?
Now I'm speaking from Italy, Rome.
Oh, beautiful. Okay. Well, thanks for the comments on the book. I'm glad it was helpful. Yeah, the term is that I used is radical self-acceptance. And what that means is it's kind of a practice. It's a practice of not judging my bad habits and being annoyed with myself for having them. And the way that one does that is to understand that everyone has them. And so you're only human. If there are things about yourself that you don't like and you wish it could be different, well, join the club. We're all in the same, we're all in that boat. And I found just personally that when I just adopted that attitude, a lot of energy that had been going on in this kind of debate, oh, you really shouldn't be doing that, but oh, yes, I want to, and this isn't any good, you know, that ended. And a great amount of energy was liberated that had been implied in that conversation. That was actually just pure curiosity. It had just been, it had gotten into a kind of a vicious circle of chasing oneself around and trying to fix it, which is not possible. And kind of when I noticed that and stopped putting so much energy into that, when the energy came free, I saw that it was really only curiosity. And so you mentioned the meaning, not searching for meaning. I'm not searching for it because it's here. I mean, listening to you talk about your experience with the book, how much more meaning could someone really require? I mean, some little gesture of mine or whatever touched another human being. It doesn't really get too much better than that. I don't know what would add more meaning to my life. Declared emperor or something. I mean, you know, yes.
Yeah.
I just want to thank you for your kindness in saying that, and I'm so glad you're enjoying the book.
Thank you.
You have anything further, Gretel?
Surely, but I couldn't express that right now.
Okay. You know, feel free to write to me if you have anything you'd like to discuss. I would be sure to reply. Okay, the next person on the list. I hope you're there, Martina.
I got it.
Yeah, there she is.
Robert, that's so sweet. And I just want to tell John that I would love to sit and hear his stories. Some of them are very similar to my experience of the path until the path ended quite spontaneously. And waking and going, I thought I was a spiritual person, but now I'm not a spiritual person and there's no path. And what was all that about back there? On a mountaintop, having a spiritual awakening and laughing my ass off for days, coming down the mountain and having to do therapy because from that altitude falling into the denser idea of life without the tools. So everything that Bernard has shared is so accurate for me. I remember coming across Maslow in his developmental stages and realizing that I had jumped over some of the stages that I really needed to go through in order to build a foundation to be able to handle what was coming at me. And also, as John, having been stripped of everything all at once, house, money, lover, the whole, just gone in a week. So there's those experiences that I too am of the mind that if someone was curious about a spiritual path or a spiritual journey, I would go, no, I would say just go and have a happy life. You know, unless it's so deep inside that you have to know, this is just do a happy life, or like John was saying, do what resonates. And that's how I'm living now, doing what I absolutely love, my art, my writing. It is very spiritual, but it's not spiritual. I'm on a little mountaintop with nature around, and that's my meditation. I've never been a meditator, but that's what I was told. Then I realized that I was always meditating in nature. That's where my union was with that essence of nature and the trees and just the whole energy of nature was my meditation. It's only just being with human beings that's a problem. And I don't know if I'll ever get over that one. So I live a quiet life, and it's wonderful, and I appreciate this Zoom meeting a lot. I do have to go. I'm actually teaching an Enneagram class to some very sweet people here, and when Bernard made the reference to Gurdjieff, he was fundamental in that Enneagram teaching, and it's one area for me that I see that using words in a system to bring a balanced way of thought to people who are just beginning. This is really basic. What's happening here in this little pueblo in the Baja, and so I'm facilitating it through Enneagram because I can't speak spiritually. I mean, I wouldn't even know how to do that with the people that are here. But they are gravitating to a system that at least expresses the head, the heart, and the sentient body, which I totally relate to through Bernard and John also. The head types are taking over the world, and it's kind of leaving the heart types behind. And so this kind of gathering fulfills that for me, and I appreciate it very much. And I thank Robert very much for his introduction, and same you, Bernard. And we'll connect like we talked, and then I do have to go. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Martina.
I had my mic off. Martina, it's just a joy to see you, and I'm glad to see you feeling happy and involved. It's wonderful, very wonderful.
Yeah. It is an interesting way of being involved. I had loftier, and again, I refer to John, I had loftier thoughts long ago about the teaching, and so I find myself here. It's very wonderfully humbling experience to be interacting with people in this way, and I'm learning as much as they're learning. And I don't know if you missed it, but I did tell you that I appreciated very much your introduction, because I can get all the love I can get, you know.
Yeah, that's it. You went through a very, very lonely, dark time,
Yes.
which you were very honest about. And it was beautiful that you could be so direct and share that. And you've come through it now, and we're finding out what love can do, huh? It's so beautiful. Yeah. It doesn't have, I think this is what Bernard and I both understand, that we really share very deeply. We don't have to define all these things. They're very large. I mean, we can't. It's not a question of understanding everything. It's more a question of participation. And the understanding comes with the participation. It's not a scheme to, to follow.
participation really is extraordinarily important at the falling apart stage, at the unraveling stage of the not understanding what the hell I was doing. All the way back then, I thought I was doing everything right, the right way, and then all of a sudden it all falls apart, and you go, what? Like John was speaking about, and without a community or a reference to that dark place, I don't know that I could have gone through it. I don't. Who would want to go through that alone? To do that. Anyway, I'm going to go, and bless you all. Thank you, and love this meeting.
Yeah, it's a joy, Martina.
My understanding at this point is there will be many juncture on anybody's journey that will be quite radical, you know, and quite confronting. But I come to a place more and more where it's possible to make this journey easier than it has been traditionally known. It's possible to make the journey in a more balanced way. And if, you know, of course, this is just wishful thinking, but if I would go back and I could do it all over again, I would do it very differently. It's possible to make things in a more balanced way, you know. What I feel happened to a lot of us, if unknowingly we were really pushing and pushing and pushing in certain direction that came from certain teachings or certain teacher that were not necessarily that human and awesome, and human in the sense of awesome. So we ended up pushing in one direction, and if you do that too much, well, there's good chance it's going to break out tragically, you know. But there's a way where it can be done in a more gentle way, more human way, more balanced way between the body and the heart and the emotion and the understanding, and so that, you know, things are more balanced. Little bit and you integrate, and little bit and you integrate, and you keep in touch with human life, and you don't become a monk like I did for 3 years, meditating 8 hours a day and so on.
Yeah, so Bernard, I agree with this, and you and I are on the same page here. I think I have stumbled onto a way of life that's different from what people seem to suffer. I'm not saying that I never suffer, but I don't suffer like that. And I'm quite aware of it. I mean, I can't deny it. It's undeniable. It's undeniable that there's a piece to all of this that I don't have to try or I don't have to remember to be peaceful. It's not like that. I'm not doing anything. That's the actual character of this aliveness. This aliveness doesn't have to live forever. See, the aliveness knows this. It's the ego self that doesn't get it. The aliveness is fine with the whole journey. That's what it's in the DNA. It's been doing this for a long time. It knows how to be a child, be an adolescent, be an adult, be an old person and perish. Bodies are good at it. They have no problem doing it. It's the ego. See, and there's a way. I'm not saying that I'm egoless. I would never say such an absurd thing. The speaker is the ego, except it's not just the ego. The speaker is also being used by the aliveness, or the knowingness. The awareness also gets to contribute. And it might be the ego very big time, like when do I get mine? Or it might be very subtle, like, gee, this is so lovely. People are here and we're all understanding one another and there's no strife, how groovy. But the experiencer of that grooviness will still be the ego. This other thing that Bernard is referring to as not the ego, that's the peaceful part. That's where the peace comes from. It's just here. It's not trying to do anything. And I think it's amazing that I can speak with another person who totally gets that and totally agrees with that. I only have a couple of people left on the planet like that. A couple of them have died. just when I was being understood. No, seriously,
I know you're serious.
You know, I go to Leonardo's grave every year. Catania and I go on the Day of the Dead, and we sit there with him and schmooze. That's been 8 years now, because he got me. That's the only reason. I realized that. He was such a wonderful, beautiful friend because he got me. And he said, oh yeah, I get you. So that's what I think. We all want to participate and we all want to be gotten. And I think the awakening part happens when it happens. It's part of it. We're all awakening. That's what's going on here. We're all of us. We're all in the same boat, awakening. And I think there are milestones. I think Bernard exemplifies one of those milestones. But he's still awakening. I think he would certainly say that. So yes, that's what I say. See, I call myself awake, but then I immediately say an awakening never ends, which is how I got started with you, Martina, on that years ago. Awakening never ends. That's all we need to know. That's all there's nothing else to actually, and then you just participate, and the awakening happens within. If it's the Enneagram, yes, sure. If somebody else is Feldenkrais, great. We all can't just follow the same narrow path from here to eternity. It's not like that. It's more like all the pathways, all the different humans and animals, we're all just, it's this sphere of energy, you know. Well, now I'm giving a talk, and I'm going to get off that. Martina, yeah, I don't really like that give a talk thing. I've seen it misused too often, I think.
Next person.
Yeah, next person. Thank you. Next person to occupy the. So thanks, Martina. You have more to say?
Yeah, thanks, Martina.
My point.
Yeah.
You mentioned G. Krishnamurti. That's a very extreme story, and what I understand is that the other people can also awaken without having some extreme, mind-blowing illness or whatever it is, calamity. Calamities, I think a lot is something has to get your attention. Maybe if you're less egotistical than I was and more tuned in, it doesn't have to be some peak experience. It just comes to you gradually as you live. You start to awaken. You say, oh yeah, see, this is a lot more fun than I thought it would be. And then that's all. So for me, somebody had to hit me over the head, I guess. And others, it may not be that way.
Well, me, I would say that even given in the best situation, like I was saying before, you know, that there can be a more balanced way. The reality will still be that there will be like a whole spectrum from easy to difficult. And we're all somewhere in that. And for whatever reason, with some people will have it easier and some people will have it more difficult. And that's just the way the cookie crumbles, as a friend of mine says.
What an idiot that guy must be. Okay, I think we're up to Nishkala. Are you here, Nishkala?
Yeah, she's there.
Would you like to speak? No? No speak? Okay, I'm going to turn on your mic long enough to at least
you can say hello.
Yes, I'll say hello, and it's lovely to be here with you all. Just really appreciating this field of sharing and the realness of it. You know, I could just hear it in the tone of the voice, even. You know.
Thank you for sharing, Mishkana.
It's up to Sterling now. Sterling, are you there?
Yes, good evening. Good evening, Robert. Good evening,
Nice,
everyone. Hi, Bernard. It's quite an enjoyable and long evening. I was 76 when this started, and now I'm 79, so I'll try to keep it short. There are so many elements coming tonight and about this theme of practice. And I see so many of these people all having had these experiences and all, have had these different practices. And I found it quite enjoyable. I took the precaution of putting a couple of my practice suggestions up on Robert's FB post before, particularly in the morning when I just go to the kitchen and look out the kitchen window, which is something for me that's very important. And then I added the entire contents of my book, The Way of the Compassionate Warrior, which only has, it's even shorter than John's, I think, 3 words: compassion, gratitude, and presence. And that's what I try to make into my sort of life as a kind of guiding practical principle of being that way in ordinary life. I don't think about it very much, or about who I am or what happened or psychological things anymore. A lot of that is just kind of vanished. But I do have these delicious moments where I am awake. And there's a kind of change in everything where things become quiet and peaceful, and the colors are enhanced, and there is almost like there is still sound, but there is no disturbance of any sort. And that's quite beautiful. And for me, it's very important and very nourishing to hear, as I did this evening, especially Bernard, who relates very closely to the person I would consider my teacher, Mr. Gurdjieff, and also to Robert, who is connected through Chappelle to a man named Willem Nyland, who was also Chappelle's teacher and who I studied with a long time ago. To see these kinds of threads being drawn together into this framework that Robert is now evolving with Bernard, this ongoing Zoom series of non-series, if you will. So I just feel very, very blessed to have you, other old people and some younger ones, to share this evening with you. That's it.
Thank you, Sterling.
There we go. I had my microphone off. Thank you so much, Sterling. It's very nice to see you. And I did see your practice of giving thanks first thing to the coffee people. Would you say something about that?
Well, when I was, so to speak, more spiritual, I think it began back at Esalen many years ago. And one of the first, and I was very close to Dick Price, and I thought all these people were fucking crazy when I first met him. And then I ran across in Church of the Miraculous and was given a whole bunch of stuff with Gurdjieff and so on. And then so it sort of started there for me. And then I spent several years watching all of the great gurus of the time coming to our house on the weekends. And so I got to see what they were like teaching in Esalen and what they were like at our farmhouse at Sycamore Canyon. And they were completely weird. And then I went in with Chazo, and I studied with people like Tarthang Tulku and a lot of these other people. And finally, I thought that a lot of this practice, everyone was doing this practice. They had all these exercises, all this stuff you had to read, and all these chanting and everything you had to do. And then I spent a lot of time also traveling the world, and I saw how many people work hard all day and have all these terrible things, and we're bombing the shit out of them in every fucking country, and all these leaders are pretending they're helping and they're not, and they're all confused. And when I get up in the morning and I make a nice cup of coffee and I smell that aroma, and then I think about all these wonderful people, like peasant people in Africa or China or South America or whatever, who work their ass off just to make a living and make these beautiful things, which we in the West, or at least I'm in the West here in Switzerland, and that we don't appreciate them that much, And so I like to think, I like this prayer. I say, thank you, coffee people. And for that, I don't mean just people that have a little plantation and make some coffee beans, but all of the people that grow rice or coffee or try to just live a decent life that we don't mention very much or think about very much, you know. In the same way, I like to light candles. Once in a while, I always light a candle for someone who died, and I make a little meal and I stick it out on my balcony so that they can, you know, whatever, if there is something afterwards, they do that. But then some days I like to light a candle for all the people for whom no candle was ever lit. So that's another practice, which brings me back to what you and Robert, Robert and Guy said was, our practice is who we are. That's the practice, right?
Yes. There is no difference between you and anything else. That's about as best as I can put it in the English language. There's no separation. There's no split. I think that's really beautiful, Sterling.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, Sterling.
Okay, we're going down the list here. This is good. We're actually getting this done.
Where there's a quiet guy there.
Quiet guy. What about the quiet guy? You're going to speak?
Okay, I'm the quiet guy. Can you hear me?
Welcome, quiet guy.
Hi. So I just want to say that one of my favorite realizations I got from Robert was that we're not built to actually find the answers. So realizing that is a big relief for me.
Yes. No final answers, right?
Yep.
The rage to conclude is a disease. It's not really anything to which one ought to aspire. We don't want to conclude. We want to be. Very different.
And another thing I got from Robert was the idea that we take ourselves too seriously.
Yes. It's Bernard referred to this earlier. I'm telling you, it hit me really great. Thank you so much for that, Bernard. It's a gem. It's like a key turns in a lock. The self-image has a core that's denied. It's the body image. We're not aware of that, but that a lot of myself is the body image, and that's getting in the way of it's casting a shadow. And there's something else that we all are that is not a body image. And whatever that is, God, I'm the last one to try to characterize it. I wouldn't. I have no idea what that is. No idea. But there's something animating all of this somehow in a way that I'm not doing it, so somehow it's happening. And that's an amazing understanding. See, you're not responsible, Danny. It's only a moment letting go. See, that would be one point. Where you just have one moment. You don't need a 10-hour meditation. You just find a moment when you're actually not non-judgmental towards oneself. There are such moments in a day for all of us. We just don't notice them, but we can if we look for them, probably find it. You just need to collect those like butterflies in a net, you know. Don't kill them. I don't mean put them on a board or something, but yeah, they're elusive. See, I think the thing that Bernard and I share in common is that both of us are just flowing. There's no impediment. Agreement and disagreement and all that has nothing to do with this, nothing. That's a sport, you know, that's something we can engage in because we're interested in this stuff. So it's nice to you know, it's like a playground. But when we're alone in the integrity of our being, there aren't any questions. There really aren't. So I've spoken with you a few times now. I'm quite certain that you have moments like that in your day. So if you want to practice, I would advise just noticing that, trying to see if you can catch yourself in a non-judgmental frame of mind and say, whoopee, this is pretty good. Mm-hmm. That's how you stop trying, not by saying, now I'll stop trying. That can't. Then you'll be trying to stop trying to. The way you do it is to notice the moments when you really aren't trying. They already exist. We're all awake. And that's why I say we're all awake. In that sense, I really mean it. This awakeness is actually what we are. It's there, everyone has it. So that's where I think, that's for you, Danny. So we've worked our way through the list. So now.
Well, there would be only Barbara left if ever she wants the last call.
Yeah, last call, Barbara.
Whoever that is, Barbara.
Okay, well, so now if Bernard is willing, and you tell me, Bernard, I think we could just allow anybody who cares to put a capper on it, have the last words, yes?
Yeah.
I would like to thank you both and the other participants as well. It's been quite a long and beautiful evening, and really there's much for me to digest about what has been shared. Thank you.
Thank you, Sterling.
Yeah, thank you, Sterling. You know, you mentioned Switzerland, you know, being the kind of the attractor of all the world's goods. Here, where I live in Mexico, this is where a lot of that stuff gets produced and shipped out of. This is a real gritty country at the moment. It's not like Switzerland. It's quite different. I'm so aware of that.
It's hard for me sometimes when I look at your pictures to think, you know, sometimes I make kind of a Robert-like pictures, like you saw the one I made of you in Portugal.
Yeah.
And around here, even if I turn my camera on to black and white, I tell you, trying to get grit, like you got grit in your pictures, is one tough job, you know, forgotten those values.
You've done a lot of the kinds of investigations of the world that I've done. That's obvious from what you're saying.
Okay.
All right. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. See you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, Bernard. Thank you, Roberto.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.